I'm holding it, yeah, which does look better
We
holding
can
it.
see it.
Okay, does it look better if I hold it to the left or hold it to the right? I think I'll hold it to the left. And I think we are live now. Hey, everyone, and welcome to Chef AJ and Friends. I'm your host, Chef AJ, and today my guest is the world-renowned plant-based cardiologist, Dr. Columbus Batiste. He has a relatively new book. It's called Selfish. It's Not What You Think. And we're going to talk about his wonderful new book today, as well as talk about a topic that I've been getting a lot of questions about lately, like why are so many vegans dying and even getting cancer? Please welcome Dr. Columbus Batiste.
Hey, so good to see you and be back on the show.
So
How
yeah,
are
you had a
you?
regular, I'm good. You had a regular slot. I think it was the third Sunday or the first Sunday of every month. And we miss seeing you then. Sorry, I'm trying to adjust my screen. So how's the book doing, by the way?
Book is doing well. Book is doing well. I think the most important thing is just the impact factor of the individuals who've read it, that they have really gravitated to it. And I've gotten back a lot of positive feedback. I was at an event this past weekend, and someone mentioned that they were using it as their little reference guide and that they had it by their bedside and would kind of reference back and look at it. And so that's always very encouraging to hear that
Yeah.
sort of ideas.
How long did it take you to write it?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. But it's been in the works for literally probably about 6, 7 years. So it's really an aggregate of my interaction with my patients over the years and looking at beyond the realm of the obvious, which is nutrition. Nutrition is obviously the center of everything, but really looking at some of the struggles that patients have had. And really, as I've tried to look and explore other avenues to really help support them in some of the words of advice. And some of these things were things I was taught as a kid and I was exposed to, and I recognized the science behind it. And I've always been sort of the curious sort where when I was a kid, I would go and I'd search the old school encyclopedias. And as I grew older, I would go and research and have that inquisitive mind. And so I started digging into it. And that was really the foundation of the book
Yeah.
itself.
Well, I'm going to be honest. I didn't read the book because I didn't get it in time, but I
No,
listened to the
that's my
whole thing.
fault.
Well, that's okay. No, but it is still read by my ears. Luckily, it's on Audible, so I was able to listen to it over a period of a few days. And I loved the voice actor. He had such a wonderful voice. Tell me about this wonderful un you know
Unknown, huh?
unknown voice actor for this book because that must have been fun to do your own book.
It absolutely was not, is, is what I could say. But all credit goes to those who do this for a profession. You know, that just the amount of effort and timing, and you think about simple things that you say every day, and how simple it is. But when you're doing a recording, repeat that again. No, say it clearer. No. And it was quite an adventure. I mean, I had the good fortune. My cousin actually owns a voiceover studio inside of LA as part of the business and has done it for years. And so she came and offered her services for her baby cousin
That's
to help coach me.
Well, that's wonderful. I did my own books, but I also did the Pleasure Trap, and they had really long words there, like that I couldn't pronounce. And I'm like, take two, take two. So, well, congratulations. I took a lot of notes on the book, and I'd like to ask you questions, but I just want to say my favorite part of the whole book, page 163. And by the way, I appreciate that you didn't have super tiny, hard to read print. The power of companion animals to combat loneliness. And I just
That's right.
fine. And I thought okay, this time we're going to wait. After it's so hard to wait because you
Yeah.
talk about your mom and Precious, and
Yes.
it's like once you let a dog or a cat or a beloved pet, could be a bird or a snake, into your life, it's like very hard to live a animal free life after that, I think.
Absolutely. Well, I have to say a little something about Precious because Precious is, it's so ironic how sometimes our companion animals, they they mirror us as individuals. And so Precious is identical to my mother, right? In only the positive way. So, my mom, bless her heart, just turned 90 this past June and is amazing. And Precious is about to turn, I believe it's 16 years old and is still as rambunctious as my mom, running around, and she has a little bit of arthritis is her major issue. She has a little allergies like my mom, doesn't like flies like my mom, and it's hilarious to see them together and see them interact. They have a lot of the same similar behaviors, if that's possible at all.
That is so cute. Oh, you're at work. I was going to say, could you show her to us, you know?
Yeah, not today.
Oh man. Well, thank you for doing this from work. So we're friends on the outside, and
Yes.
I think I'm one of the ones that really encouraged you to step out. You remember you
Yes.
my living room, my small living room in Sherman Oaks, and I said you need to be, one of the voices in this plant-based world. So we talked about other things, and I remember a couple of years ago when Hans Deal had his stroke, and I was very upset, and we
Yeah.
talked, and then ultimately, unfortunately, he died, and then almost to the day a year later, Dr. McDougall passed away, and then now we have the wonderful Dr. Baxter Montgomery, who was much younger than the other two, and now John Robbins. And we get a
Yeah.
lot of questions, and a lot of people doubt that there's any reason to do a plant-based diet because all these vegans are dying, and they can point to me, well, look, you did everything right, and you had cancer. And what I appreciated, because this topic and your book kind of they go together,
Yeah.
because one of the things I appreciate about your book, and of course you talked about how important diet is, but you could do everything right with diet and even exercise and dot the I's and cross the T's, but there are other factors of health.
Yes. Yes. Well, I think what folks out there have to realize, I must say the obvious. This is gonna be like Captain Obvious in this moment right now. We all are going to die. I
Uh-oh, you froze. Did he freeze for you? Hello? He looks
we
good, but
do in that dash mark. So when we think about a tombstone, we always see such and such name, born, date of birth, and date of death or departure. And we see between that dash mark. That dash mark is what counts, the level and the timing of the impact. And so we understand that there is indeed going to be an end, but the question always amounts to what is our health span in that period of time? How are we living our best life, or how are we living with a life of purpose becomes extremely important. And so, yes, we understand that it's all about risk. And so, adopting a plant based nutrition, a vegan lifestyle that's centered on a whole food plant based diet is one in which we're lowering our risk. But no one should ever excuse that for saying the risk is zero, that because of the fact that someone dies, it means that it's not beneficial. It is. We don't know how many years of life was extended in each of those individuals by the number one, their purpose, by two, they're exercising their belief, and most importantly, the nutrition that they were eating that was helping their body fight. And that's where the
yeah,
power lies.
absolutely. And people seem to forget there's this really important thing called genetics.
Yes, that's right. So even in the greatest studies that have been done, and we know there's a lot of polygenic risk scores that are out there, and we do assessments to see that, guess what? Lifestyle can impact your genetic predisposition, and it can lower your risk even if you are genetically predisposed, but it never once again says it takes that to zero. It never says that it takes that to zero. And we know that health is an aggregate. It's not just one aspect of our lives. Health is an aggregate of multiple factors that come into play, multiple lived experiences that plays a role and shapes not only who we are, but our health, our current health state and our future health state too as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things, let's see, I took a bunch of notes for your book, but you have an equation that I think is really interesting that you talk about all throughout the book.
Yes. Well, there's several. And so the one that I say most importantly that pertains to this is that our health really truly equals our resiliency divided by our stress.
Hmm.
And I do believe that stress is a common thread for disease, and that stress leans itself over into an inflammatory process, whether or not it's on the microscopic level of oxidative stress, or whether or not it's on a macroscopic level in terms of perceived stress, which we all can equate to, right? That perceived stress of the environment that we live in, the news, 24/7 news, or even the fear of the death that of what may happen from seeing things that transpire with others. All those things are there. That stress is constant. But the question is, how are we building our resiliency? on a day in and day out basis to offset that stress denominator on the consistency.
Yeah. So how, well, okay. Sometimes we can't mitigate our stress at least immediately because there's
Yeah.
difference. Sometimes there's acute stress, you were in an accident or something. And then there's also chronic stress
Yeah.
of maybe having a disease or a disabled child or something. So sometimes we can't change our stress, but how do we increase our resiliency so that we can favor that equation towards a better lifespan and better health span?
Yeah, no, and you said it so perfectly because, first of all, I mean, there are multiple forms of stress, and we need a level of stress inside of our lives. And there's eustress and there's distress. And distress is the one that causes the harm and that erodes our well-being and the allostasis. And so I always kind of describe it. It's almost like this: if I add a stress to myself and I say, okay, Columbus, I'm gonna get up and I want you to stand on one foot. Right. So my body is making adjustments to allow me to maintain that homeostasis, that balance that's there. Right. And so for me to remain upright. Now, if you tell me close my eyes and hold my arms out, now I'm adding another stressor. Now, if you tell me to hold weights in my arm, I'm adding another. That's called allostatic load of what your body is doing to maintain this level of balance. But eventually, that allostatic load leads to wear and tear on the organism or the person that's there. And that's where the power of resilience comes in. So imagine had I been doing exercises or variables that are there on a regular basis, now my resilience, my bank, my savings account is built up. So when we look at the concept of health equals resiliency over stress, we have to look at what actions we're doing. Everything we do is either adding to our resiliency or adding to our stress. So, inside of our domain, and all the wonderful physicians and scientists and activists that you speak to that are really promoting the power of whole food, plant based nutrition are absolutely correct. They're telling you about the power of adding to your nutritional resiliency, that through nutrition that you are adding components that are there. But one of the areas that's equally as important is our mindset, right? It's our mindset in terms of how we perceive our external environment, that power of belief, the power of the presence, and so forth, and that mindfulness, meditation. And so when I talk about the essence in selfish stands for spirituality. And so spirituality isn't necessarily just an meaningfully important inside the components, and studies have shown a direct relationship between those who engage in meaning and purpose and their longevity that's there, as well as their stress reduction in terms of counterbalancing that. We understand the power of once again of meditation or breathing. If you say, well, I'm not into that spiritual aspect of meditation and I don't believe in prayer, okay, let's focus on breathing. And that's one of the things I bring up is that when we breathe, there's so much science behind breath work and what we do. And when we're stressed, we tend to hold our breath. Not only because we're stressed, but because we have a desire to look a certain way. So we hold our gut in, right? I don't want my gut to. So we're holding our breath and we're uptight. And so what impact does that have on your cardiovascular system in churning that, the stress hormone cascade that's there? So there are so many components. And that's what I outline in the book Selfish is really the centerpiece. The F is food. It's real food, whole food, plant-rich foods. But the S, the E, the L, the I, the S, and the H are all the components that really add towards a holistic approach of how we can build our resiliency to offset the stress that's going to be there irrespective.
Do you lump trauma into the same category as stress for its impact on disease? And what impact does long-term stress have on our disease outcomes, or even whether or not we get a disease, for example?
No, that's a great question. And so, yes, there are different forms of stressors. These are all stressors that essentially they trigger the same stress cascade in our body. So whether or not it's trauma, past trauma, traumatic events, and post-traumatic stress disorder, or not even to that, not even having the label, but just you've been through many life experiences, or whether or not it's financial stress, whether or not it's relationship stress, all these things add and they create this heightened sense of awareness in our body with the stress hormone cascade. And so there is a direct relationship that studies have really begun to identify as it pertains to a relationship between the stress and inflammation and what transpires in our body. And so that's where studies have demonstrated a relationship between perceived stress and why it's so important that it's characterized as perceived stress is because we all perceive life events differently. And what may be stressful for one may not be stressful to another person. But in my mind, if I perceive this as a stressful situation, my body then goes in subconsciously. It triggers the stress hormone cascade that, when unrelenting, when that gas is just flooding forward, that gas pedal in that car is going forward, the engine's just surging. The same thing happens in our body. And that's what revs up the burden of disease inside of our system.
Yeah. Thank you. So let's talk about some of our colleagues. And first of all, we don't have any inside information, but a lot of people think like there's some kind of conspiracy about the way that some of these doctors passed away. Like, first of all, let's see, Hans and Dr. McDougall were, I believe, 77. Dr. Montgomery was, I believe, 61, and John Robbins was 77. But he had post-polio syndrome, and he talked about it openly. So I feel it's okay to talk about that. And maybe you could just spotlight a little bit about these doctors, because people are just like, well, if they did everything right and they're dying of these serious diseases at what they perceive as a young age, why should I even bother eating healthfully?
Yeah, and I think we have to be careful in terms of the judging aspect, right? In terms of the life and existence of one person. And it gets into the aspect, once again, there is not one sole ingredient. So just like when AJ, when you're in the, and when you're there and you've done numerous wonderful cookbooks out there, there's not just one ingredient inside of your recipes. There's not one ingredient. There may be one central ingredient, whether it's beans, it's dates, whatever it may be, potatoes, but it's not just one ingredient. And that's the same thing as it relates to the attaining health. It's not just one ingredient. Nutrition is one component. And that's what's so important. So when we look at the lives of these individual physicians, and I can't speak to them personally in terms of what their journey was or their burden, but I can empathize with them. That one, when you're a physician, it can be at times hard to go see other physicians, right? It can be hard. And so it's hard. And so the concept out there is you have to inspect what you expect. So how often are we inspecting what's happening in our own bodies on a consistent basis? What our numbers are, our blood pressure, our markers of inflammation, our other risk factors. The other aspect that can become so challenging as a physician who advocates for lifestyle and purports this, we're all humans, which means we're all going to live and we're all going to die and get sick. But now I may be living in isolation and shame because of the fact that if I have something treatable, even if it is, and I've taken care of individuals, AJ, where they've been, they haven't, aren't physicians, but were staunch advocates inside of the plant-based world, and they were deathly afraid of anyone finding out about an ailment with them. And they were living in shame with, and the level of stress that they were under in that moment, because they did not want someone to lose the message because of something that transpired with them, is unfair not only to them, but it's unfair to everyone else. Because I think that when we go ahead and we allow ourselves to be vulnerable from a standpoint, and that's not easy to do, this level of intimacy, this level of the attacks that can happen in this virtual space are astronomical. And so these individuals may be living alone in isolation and not having the relationships that they can decrease that stress. They may be overworking themselves. As physicians, that's something that is promoted. Is for us to live in a state in which you don't ask for help and you do more and more and more on a regular basis. And so sleep goes out the window, rest goes out the window. Vacation is a sign of weakness when you take time off. Intimacy of relationships and making yourself vulnerable, you can't do that either. So now I can't do that. Now I don't have time to exercise, right? Because so the stress and then taking time for any of the other aspects. And so this, once again, is not targeted to any of the colleagues and my friends and colleagues who passed away. This is a generalization of what can happen for individuals inside this space and those who are not in this space, but those who are specifically taking care of patients in any degree, whether physicians, nurse practitioners, health coaches, well, life coaches, whatever it may be, there is a level of impact that's there.
Right. And,
And shame.
it's not like any of the four icons that passed had identical twins where we could have studied how long the standard American diet lived. And people have to realize that Dr. John McDougall had that I think it was called a lacunar stroke at 18. And John Robbins had polio. And I mean, these are very serious conditions that people can die from, and who knows how long they would have lived. And it's not even how long, because we know that both of them lived very well. They had no chronic
Yes.
illnesses. I mean, and they lived full lives, so I think their diet still served them. And people say, well, look at you, you got stage 3 lung cancer. Well, what would have happened if I continued to just eat the junk food vegan diet that I used to eat? And a lot of people will say that the reason I'm doing so well, despite everything, is because of my diet. It's not, the diet did not cause the stage 3. Now, people,
Correct.
we talk about this thing with Dr. Matt Letterman, these things called error of attribution
Hmm.
or confirmation biases. So eating a plant-based diet did not cause me to get lung cancer. If anything, it contained it so that it was growing so slowly. That's how I feel, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And we minimize the impact of a lifetime of exposures, whether or not that's air quality, whether or not that's noise, pollution, all these things, wildfires that exist and what begins to happen and take place on a DNA level that's there that can impact all of us at times. And so there are so many additives in terms of things that can play a role in the formation of disease. And what we have to understand is that for all diseases, they happen on the microscopic level. And so when we do our early detection, that's all prevention allegedly is inside of the healthcare system. We're trying to do our earliest perceivable detection, which means a test, but that test only denotes it on the macroscopic level. Once it's formed and it's more advanced. And so our body is constantly fighting through multiple exposures so to your point, yes, you're trying to leverage the army to fight on your behalf. You're trying to leverage the weight of disease formation versus not based upon all of your activities. And the nutrition is indeed the core. And so I think if we identify that there was a that the large bulk of studies have pointed to as a propagator of disease, then our goal is to try and avoid that. But our goal is not just to avoid a certain type of nutrient value. It's to see where we're replacing it with. Are we replacing it with something that is additive to our life as a whole and is helping to build our resiliency from a nutritional standpoint?
Yeah. Thank you. So, okay, so one of the things, this is something kind of funny in your book. You talked about you faked an asthma attack. I have asthma. How do you do that? I'm trying to think from an acting standpoint, like how and why did you do that? You don't seem like
Well,
somebody would do that.
well, I mean, you don't think I'm a good actor?
No,
I'm an
I do think
amazing
you are, but
actor.
I'm trying to.
No.
Okay, fake it right
Well,
now. Fake it right now. Hey, that's pretty good wheezing.
so to an expert out there, they know that that's an upper airway sound. That's not a true bronchospasm sound. And so as a kid, being the youngest, and my dad was a great guy, a great man. He definitely was passionate and definitely would let his feelings to be known. And I was somewhat of a little bit of a soft kind of a kid, soft spoken and everything of that sort. And so I didn't like any elevated voices. If they raised a voice at all, I didn't like any of that stuff. And so I think it probably evolved. And one time I was sitting there probably crying or doing something, and they thought, oh, okay, well, is he wheezing? He's having a problem. And I probably in my head as a kid recognized, they stop if I start acting like I'm sick. And so it wasn't every time, but it was probably strategic. And I can't say it was conscious, but I know that those were things that I did. I definitely admit that that was not now. And here's a truth moment. Now my wife will say if I happen to kind of swallow water the wrong way and I start coughing, and she'll say, "Listen, I'm not your parents. You can't trick me into thinking that you're having an asthma attack right now."
She, that's so funny. That's great. You know, you talked about some of the other letters in the book. What if you want, just talk about the acronym SELFISH and
Yeah.
people to be inspired. Hopefully, they'll buy the book. I've been posting a link below. It's also available in Audible.
No, I appreciate that. Yeah, no, and the thing is, so selfish is an acronym, and there's a great movie out there called The Beautiful Mind by Russell Crow years and years and years ago. And, in that movie, it's almost like I remember, never forget, like how everything just started coming into place for him. And I'll never forget listening to an athlete, some call him the greatest or second greatest basketball player ever to play, Michael Jordan. And he said, in order to be great, you have to be selfish. It's like, in order to succeed, you have to be selfish. And it was weird. It was just like all of a sudden, all the things that I would coach patients on and that I would talk periodically fell into place with the idea of selfish and where the first S begins with spiritual. And so for myself, I am a spiritual person and I grew up in a Christian denomination. And as I've grown, I still am. I still am, but I also recognize that there are many faiths. But I recognize too as well the power of it in terms of the peace that individuals may perceive when they engage in meditation. I tell a story about my mom sitting there, and how as a young kid I went over to her and I started crying because she was meditating and just quiet. I'm like, "What's wrong? What's wrong, mom? No, no, no." And she was like, "I'm okay, babe. I'm okay." It was her way to kind of recharge and get herself going again. And as I learned about the power of it and what begins to transform in our mind, that how our prefrontal cortex begins to thicken, where we reason and our planning begins to happen, and how meditation begins to tone down the amygdala, that area where it houses our fear and the recognition of life experiences that triggers us down that stress cascade, and the beneficial effects on our endothelium that are there. I began to recognize the power of meditation. I began to recognize the power of breathing. When we look at the Latin root of spiritual is spiritus, which means breath. And so we recognize our breath is so powerful in how our body moves and it should move and from a physiologic standpoint. Then I recognize the power of what truly is the spiritual journey. It's about finding meaning and purpose in life, right? And that meaning and purpose, many find it in terms of seeking God, a higher power. Others find it in terms of their intention, and many times they align together, and that gives you focus that's there. And so this is the beginning, and this is what we call one of those keystone foundational habits that are there. Then we move to E, exercise, and exercise is easy to get, like movement. But when we look at it from a perspective of exercising belief, the power of belief. And so I love the work, and now you're up there inside that area in Northern California, AJ, where Professor Crum, Aaliyah Crum, did phenomenal work as it relates to the power of belief and looking at how the mindset matters so much, and that if I believe that this provider is going to give me help or that this medication is, there's tremendous power in terms of how your body responds to that, whether it's weight loss, whether or not it's the ingredients, whether or not it's whatever happens. I'll never forget, I didn't tell this story, but I remember cleaning my teeth in med school, and all of a sudden I look in the back of my mouth and I see something black back there on my tooth. And I'm like, "Oh my goodness, I have a cavity. My tooth is rotting." And all of a sudden I started having horrific jaw pain. I had to leave out of class and I got an emergent appointment the next day. I was up all night with this pain. And I went in to see the dentist, and he looked and he said, "That's just a feeling." I was like, "I'd never had a cavity before. I never had a feeling." He said, "Yes, you did. You had a feeling. This is a silver feeling. And that's all it is." Why was it within a matter of minutes, the pain dissolved? I felt better immediately. That's the power of the mind, the power of belief to really kind of trigger all of these aspects are there. But that's not just it. We have to look in terms of our movement and our activity. And there's so much power as it relates to our ability to exercise and what exercising does in order to kind of really truly build resilience in our mind, our learning. It boosts our immune system that's there, and our natural killer cells that are there to attack tumors and everything of that sort, reduces the insulin growth like factor. It helps give us endorphins to help alleviate, especially when we do outdoor. So we start seeing all these things that start to move together. Then the L stands for love, love in action. So forgiveness, gratitude, and altruism. And those simple things. And I love telling the story about individuals in my area who had heart blocked arteries. They had blocked arteries. And so they did a type of imaging test where it demonstrated that there was a lack of blood flow to the heart muscle in all these individuals. Well, to one group, they had them go through forgiveness training. And then the other group, keep doing what you're doing. They gave them an anger recall and had them go ahead, remember something that made them angry. Go and do the imaging study again, and guess what happened? The group that learned how to forgive themselves and others had improved blood flow to the heart without stents, improved blood flow without bypass surgery, without additional medications. And that tells you the impact of stress with anger as a form of a stressor that's there. And so we see the correlates with forgiveness and gratitude, as well as in altruism or volunteering. Food, enough can be said about food. Intimacy of relationships, and I don't mean in a sexual way, but just from a standpoint of whether or not it's having someone or a pet companion that you are able to make yourself vulnerable with. When we look at take first individuals, that we can be vulnerable. And that's what I was referencing as it relates to specifically at looking at the fallen leaders in terms of physicians and so forth, and what's transpired with them is the fact that they may have lived in isolation, that loneliness, and loneliness can happen even when you're a group of people. That you perceive your relationship should be better, that you have better, closer interactions, and you don't have it, you feel alone. You feel in isolation. And that is a form of a stressor. So when we can engage with individuals or having a pet that will increase our oxytocin, that love hormone, right? That tend and befriend that's there and activate our parasympathetic tone that gets us out and interacting with others by the fact we have such a lovely companion. That's power. The S of sleep or rest, that goes without saying, the power of that. But last, I'll say we end up with H, which is humor and joy in life, finding joy in life. That it doesn't matter if you're the greatest vegan, plant-based person, advocate, but if you don't have joy and can't laugh, can't smile along the lines of your journey, then then what's the point of all of it? You know, something just struck me when we talk about some of the greats who have fallen is that what's interesting is that Kobe Bryant is someone who died suddenly and his life was ended. And although it was tragic due to an accident, one could say, well, what was the point of getting up and doing all that work? He lived life to the fullest. He's inspired millions of individuals based on his life. The legacy that he left is phenomenal. And so I would say in like kind, the legacy of Dr. Montgomery, the legacy of Dr. Deal, the legacy of John McDougall, the legacy of John Robbins, it will live on in perpetuity beyond them based upon their passion and their purpose that they live this thing called life. And so I would say their life was not in vain. I would say that their life was not cut short. I would say that their life, that they fulfilled their assignment for the time that they were meant to be here on this earth, and that none of us can predict when we're supposed to be here or when we're not. We're just supposed to make the most of what we have. And that's one of the things I tell my kids is the fact that, listen, you have to make the most of what you have, your resources, your opportunities that are here. You maximize your talents. The greatest talent that you could have is your health. And pouring into your health with how you feed your body is one of the most important things you'll ever do. One of the most important things you'll ever do.
Right. And I feel like a lot of people in the vegan and plant-based movement only look at the F in your acronym, food.
Yes.
And you talked about don't blame people, but there's still a lot of diet wars. I can go back many, many years ago between, Furman versus McDougall, starch
Yeah.
versus, potatoes versus beans, and don't have rice. And then, you've got the SOS free vegans, which I am no longer an SOS free vegan. I mean, I do not eat oil, but I'm not SOS free. Ooh. And, the people say, well, if you didn't do the vegan diet right or best, or you didn't do Brooke. I love Brooke Goldner, by the way. She has a regular shop, but you didn't do her program. And people, I think, they put too much stock in that diet is everything.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the part of the reason, I'll tell you the reason why. The same reason why mainstream medicine, they minimize the power of nutrition and say, well, that's soft science. I don't know if that's correlation. That's not causation. They like to say things like that. It's the same thing that staunch advocates of the plant-based nutrition lifestyle, they put in terms of the other aspects of life, of spirituality, of the exercise, of the love, and the other components. And when we get down to the fact that the majority of Americans are eating ultra processed, refined, factory engineered foods, and we're arguing over starch or no starch, we're arguing over a little bit of added salt inside of your pot of fresh greens or of homemade chili with mushrooms and lentils and tomatoes. we're losing the focus. We're losing the focus on the audience that really matters. And we're giving the impression that if you do this in our ivory tower, that you will live forever, that we have found the fountain of youth. And that's the reason why folks are turning and saying, well, really? If you have the fountain of youth, why are people passing away? And it's not about the fountain of youth. It's about living your best life right now, giving you the vitality, giving you the energy to fight, giving you the fuel to fight back, to fight against disease, to fight against tyranny, to fight against all the things that we need to do in this life for the next generation. That's so important.
Yeah, absolutely. I could not agree with you more. You
Mm,
know, it's interesting on my earlier show today, it was a chef, so we couldn't answer, but somebody put in the chat, well, I was vegan for 2 years, but my A1C went up. And people don't always realize that cause doesn't equal effect. You know, we don't know what her vegan diet was, first of all,
correct.
but people, I think they put too much emphasis on the diet is being able to cure everything, reverse everything. And it's just not true. And it's just, but I feel like that people want to believe that, just like Santa Claus. You know, I would like, maybe there really is a Santa Claus, but it's the same thing. And also, what other people don't realize is most of us, including the four vegan icons that died, were not raised vegan. We don't know how many years of what kind of diet they ate, and that has an impact, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. But I mean, here's the thing. Back to your example of the individual who kind of said, "Hey, listen, this didn't work for me for X, Y, and Z." We cannot. I think we cannot extrapolate out. I always give the analogy. One of my close friends from college, he bought a BMW, really expensive, expensive car. Ever since I was in med school, driving around in old clunker, and he always bought a lemon. There was always a problem, whether it was the high end brand of car. And does that mean no one should ever buy that car? Well, people will laugh. Of course, that doesn't mean that. This stuff happens. Well, the same thing happens as it pertains to health, is that there are individual responses. Then there's multiple factors that can play a role. And then there's large scale trends we have to look at to see, you know what, this seems to be something consistent that may be predictive, but recognizing there is not one sole component. It's an aggregate, is this thing called health. I'll never forget when I was doing my cooking class, the cath lab, and someone came in and it was almost like if they were a plant, and we're doing completely whole food plant-based recipes and everything of that sort. And they were like, where's the meat? I'm keto and I lost all this weight and I'm doing so well. And everyone it was funny. It was almost like a TV show. All the eyes just immediately turned and looked over at me. Like, what is he gonna say? Is he gonna beat her up? Is he gonna vilify her? And what I did was I looked at her and I said, that's amazing. I said, do you recognize what you've done? Is you have eliminated ultra processed foods. I said, you've moved from a state of eating ultra processed foods on a consistent basis. I said, now the next question is, what do you want? I want my health. I said, so if you want your health, what are you willing to do to get your health? And what won't you do? Now, if you want, we need to take the next step. That next step is looking at the literature that supports and tells us the impact of red meat, the impact of some X, Y, and Z as we kind of went down. And we went inside of an area that was respectful for her, acknowledging her journey and where she's at on her place on this journey instead of vilifying her. And this is what I'll say, right? And this may get me shot down on your show, AJ, by everyone. Everyone has their perspective, and we have to understand. So, if I'm vegan, I may be an ethical vegan where I believe that it is criminal to bring any harm to animals, and that is my sole reason for not eating meat. Then I'm a health conscious vegan. I'm in it because I believe that this pathway is better for my overall well being and consistent with the planetary health and so forth. And then I may just be plant based just because of for nutrition, for health alone. And so what we understand is that each sector there may have different things that will trigger them to be extremely passionate, but at the end of the day, if we're able to move that dial of more people towards plant-based nutrition, increase our burden of chronic disease on large scale. There's no doubt about that. The evidence is clear as it relates to it. And so we have to come together and respect individuals, but in a way in which, with love, we can bring them closer towards where we're going. And that's what my sole goal is to move people in that needle forward. I know what my dietary intake is. I know what I ascribe for doing. I understand the power and the enlightenment and the openness it's provided me as a practitioner in the individual.
Thank you. One of the viewers named Peter is saying, I don't like the title of this interview because mortality rate is 100% for everyone, last I checked. And yes, it is. And I think the reason for the title is because so many people are hiding their diagnosis. Recently, my good friend Chuck Carroll came out. He has kind of a very, I don't know if you followed his story, but kind of a mysterious thing going on with his body. It's something, a disorder of the gut-brain axis. And he had regained some of the weight where he had from gastric bypass, and people were accusing him and saying things. And I mean, I really admire him that he came out and I came out and a few other people, but I know so many people in the plant-based world
Oh,
because maybe they have a book or a blog and they're hiding their diagnosis. Sometimes it's cancer, sometimes it's other thing because they feel like it's going to hurt the movement because people say, well, see, they did this for this long and they got cancer. But like you say, you're just increasing your odds. There's no, I like the way Dr. Simran Malhotra said, our plant-based diet is our seatbelt. It helps when we're in an accident, but it doesn't stop all accidents from happening.
that's right. That's right. That's a great analogy. And that is our sole goal. Everything in life is about lowering your risk. That's it. And there's no different whether it's a financial investment, whether or not, like you mentioned, in terms of road safety investment, there is inherent risk by being alive on this planet. An old wise sage cardiologist, when I was in training, he said, listen, Columbus, there is one stat that's not defeated. There's 100% mortality. You're born and you die. And he is absolutely right. And so that's why at the beginning, to Peter, we said, listen, there is a time to be born and a time to die. And it's what we do in the dash that really matters. And so the title is a great title because this is the question that people are asking.
That's exactly how they're asking it. Because another viewer, Karina, is saying the title should be Why Are So Many Vegans Dying Prematurely of Preventable Diseases? How can you say polio is a preventable disease if you were born before the polio vaccine, for
Yeah.
example? You know,
Or because of the fact that we don't know what transpired in the lives of the individuals who passed away. So, when we're looking at things overall, once again, even when we look at the Adventist Health Study, which is the largest aggregate of data that we probably have that partitions vegans, vegetarians, pescatarians, meat eaters, and looking long term in terms of risk reduction, we're looking somewhere around 15, 16% lower risk of all cause mortality. What does that mean? There still is a persistent 84% risk of dying. So yes, we understand that yes, guess what? We can reduce the risk of cardiovascular disease by somewhere about 19 to 25%. That means what? 75% still persistent risk of having something bad transpire. Cancer risk is lower, somewhere around the 20% reduction rate. That means what? It still is persistent. There still is a risk despite the efforts. It's not about saying that even these chronic disease states, it doesn't mean that you are certain you will eliminate it to zero. And so that is something that we have to reach folks with and look really individually on what is your goal in looking at the treatments. Now, I think one of the things that I agree the most rather, with everyone who comes on is the fact that we should not seek to keep pouring bad food into our body and saying like, okay, give me more medications, give me this, as if it's going to be the cure all. It will not be. It has to be a combined effort. It has to be a combined effort. And for some individuals, they will achieve all their goals with just lifestyle. Other individuals, they may need medications, treatments, therapies, and they should not have a scarlet letter on their
that
chest.
could be a whole other show about how, and I believe me, I'm lumping myself in this group, how resistant some vegans are to taking any medication. I mean, I'm hypothyroid. For years, I fought it because I'm like, oh my God, that means I failed as a vegan.
Yeah.
Genetics really has a huge impact on things, and so does environment. If somebody ate the perfect diet, but lived in an apartment like I did and probably was exposed to radon, the diet cannot necessarily fix everything.
Yeah. Well, and you just heard the statistics I threw out there, right? As it relates to some of the reduction around somewhere around 20 to 25%, just throwing out numbers that are there. And so you can fact check me and kind of look into the breakdown if it's 16 or 17 or 18.2%. But when we look at chronic perceived stress as it relates to some of the cancer accelerator and the rates and risk, somewhere in that 10 to 20%. So you're telling me that what I'm saying is that you may actually offset and neutralize some of the benefits by holding on to some of the chronic stress, by not having someone that you can talk to, by not doing some of the things that may help lower the burden. And what I'm telling you is that there is such a growing recognition of this, and specifically in the field of cardiology for me, is because since I entered into practice, I have seen nothing but a surge in the recognition in science behind the relationship and the mechanism of how stress impacts the heart. Whether it's broken heart syndrome through Takotsubo, whether or not it's increase in hypertension, whether or not it's in chronic disease, in terms of diabetes, we're seeing all of these things that are starting to be elucidated on a continual basis, and not to separate the fact that behavioral consequence that happens as a result. That when we're stressed, the other equation in the book is stress equals demands minus resources. And when the demands are overwhelming, we turn to fake resources. And we do that because it's so easy because of the pleasure trap, right? That's a natural biological process, physiologic process of where we're going to go towards. And that is part of the compounding problem. And it's hard to tease that out on how much of it is my bad lifestyle that I undertake because of the stress, or how much of it is from the stress itself. But we know as an aggregate, they all lend themselves to disease burden.
Absolutely. And we don't know what stress somebody has been through or is going through. Gina, who's watching live, said how the SOFA's free diet helped with her MS, but she didn't realize what a huge impact stress was. And we learned from Dr. Matt Letterman on last Thursday's show that stress actually impacts your immune system. So
Yes.
if you get a disease, it's harder to fight.
That's right. I mean, here's the crazy part too, is that we know that when individuals are under stress, that even if they were to receive a vaccination, individuals, one under stress and one not, in terms of the body's ability to respond and incorporate the immunity, build the immunity it needs from it, it's minimized because of the impact of stress. So stress has such tremendous, and I don't want us to get so afraid of stress that we're stressed, right? And that happened to me. So when I had a colleague when I started out inside of practice who was in his 40s, passed away from colon cancer in his 40s. And I'll never forget when I went to see him in the hospital before he passed. And it was just an image I wish I didn't have, but it was something I had to do. I just said to myself, okay, I'm not gonna let this happen to me. I gotta get out of here. I gotta have a life. I need to do other things, go home and see my kids. I created stress trying to avoid stress. I created so much stress. And that's one of the reasons when we talk about why I wrote the book, all these things layered that I recognize in my patients, that some patients, I would tell them, I don't want you monitoring anything because it's going to stress you out. Other patients, I knew by them monitoring, it was going to help give them a sense of control and purpose. And so I would try and tease that out based upon the individual, recognizing that we're all different in how we process the world around us in that external environment. Stress is powerful. It really, truly is.
Right. And I think people seeking whatever they believe is dietary perfection can cause them stress. I see this a lot in people that are in the SOS free world, like, oh, like they could be having, it's just, it's mind blowing how, I'm not saying sugar and oil and salt are good, but it's just, I see this a lot in this dietary fanaticism, and I was guilty of it myself. And I think if somebody is a true hardcore food addict, there might be a reason, but I've really loosened up the screws a lot, and I find I have a lot less stress. I'm not eating at McDonald's, don't get me
Yeah.
wrong, but if there's a little bit of salt and
Yeah.
the mustard, God forbid, the stress of dietary perfection is worse than the impact that that small amount of salt and the condiment is having on my body.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I mean, truth be told, I seek in my own cooking that I'm meticulous. When I'm out, I make the best judgment and assessment in that moment of that I can,
Same here.
right?
I don't add sugar, oil, or salt to my recipes, but I leave some wiggle room for, like you say, eating out, or for people that are in mixed families when I'm
Mhm.
telling them, okay, do this recipe, take your part out, put a quarter teaspoon of salt in for everybody else, that kind of
Yeah,
thing.
absolutely.
Yeah. So we have a question that was sent in by Jane, and this is kind of on topic, well, mainly because you're a cardiologist. And she said, myself and my family line has genetic heart disease. And the question, can you tell me anything about lipoprotein small a? It's supposedly worse than LDL and supposedly no way of lowering it. I started my whole food plant-based SOS-free diet in January, stuck to it like glue, told all my friends, and they supported me. I lost weight, felt great, and all bloods were great except for cholesterol, which raised LDL very slightly. I don't know what NB means. Quadruple bypass at 48, now 62. I have 17 stents and I'm running out of options.
Mm. So that's a great question. So LP-Lo-A, lipoprotein A, is a marker, right? An atherogenic marker on the cholesterol profile that's not standardly tested, that is predictive. And we're seeing there's increasing data that increases the risk of adverse cardiovascular events. When we look at our standard lipid profile, our cholesterol, our HDL, our low density lipoprotein, those are for the most part calculated, except for the cholesterol. If those are calculations, they aren't actually going and measuring the actual amounts. And that's one of the simple tests that you can do is what's called the apolipoprotein B, which will be an umbrella. It aggregates all the harmful cholesterol particles that are inside your bloodstream or inflammatory particles that are there. There was actually a few studies that were done. We spoke about Baxter Montgomery. He led the study in these very small numbers, so it's not enough to really say broad sweeping that this will work. But he put individuals on a very strict plant-based diet, right? So part of it was green juices and all green leafy vegetables and so forth for a period of time. And they saw a significant reduction in apolipoprotein B as well as lipoprotein A. There were one or two other smaller studies that really noted something very similar. There was a study out of True North where they case study where they showed a reduction in it with water fasting. So it tells us that lifestyle might be able to impact it. It's not completely static, but it's not enough strength in the size of the individual study, the number of individual study, for us to make broad sweeping recommendations. What I tell individuals is let's focus on the apolipoprotein B. Let's focus on that C-reactive protein, driving those numbers down. Let's get that preferential to get a sense. So I had a retired physician who came and he asked my opinion. And so we started kind of just connecting for like the ensuing 6 to 8 weeks. And he went completely hardcore in terms of his nutrition and dropped his numbers down astronomically. He was not able to get the lipoprotein A completely normal, but he was able to drop that apolipoprotein B, which is a better marker in terms of than LDL for predicting. And that's what you can do. So if you drive that inflammatory marker down with high sensitivity C-reactive protein, that's helpful. That tells us your inflammation, your body, you've turned that stove down. So things don't just sit there burning and simmering like that. And that's where you can get your power. But I want to be encouraging to you. Our sole goal is to help you feel better, live longer. So if you're feeling better, and then we know that we've achieved half the goal. Living longer, as we spoke about throughout the entirety of this program thus far, we can't predict what your end date was supposed to be if you lived a different life versus now, or what they call in the Marvel universe, and those for you movie aficionados out there, the alternative universe. We don't know what your life would look like down the different pathway of eating healthfully, unhealthfully. We would presume it would be a lot shorter. So the fact that you're doing what you're doing right now and you're not having symptoms, you're achieving the goal. And that's what I would use as your marker, along with C-reactive protein and lipoprotein B.
Thank you so much. One of the things I thought was really interesting in your book, because that's the whole reason I moved up here from the desert, is the importance of having friends.
Yes, yes, it's so powerful. It's so powerful in terms of the camaraderie, not just from a standpoint of relationships of, the old adage, birds of a feather flock together, that can help encourage you and move you towards the state that you're wanting to be, to improve yourself, but also just that aspect of lowering your guard, of having someone that you can trust, that you can communicate with and express your feelings. That's so powerful when we look at this relationship of loneliness and intimacy, and that those contradictory types of lifestyles lived. And so if we're able to engage in healthy relationships, I don't mean any relationship, a positive relationship, one that's reciprocal, one in which an individual is able to engage, studies have shown there is a distinct relationship, specifically looking at cardiovascular outcomes, our stress hormone cascade, in individuals who have more relationships. I'll tell you who's at greatest risk are men. Actually, this is one that is I launched my YouTube channel. It started kind of giving information out there, Healthy Heart Doc. And so I put out one as it relates to men. And do you recognize that the amount of men who have close ties and relationships has dwindled? And we understand like why men are living sicker and dying sooner, don't go to the doctors. We don't have intimate relationships. Across the board on large studies, women tend to have more relationships than men do. And that's the reason, one of the many reasons why at the time of divorce or death, that men oftentimes end up faring poorly compared to women.
Nice. You ever hear Dr. McDougall saying men die quicker, women die sicker?
I hadn't heard that, but yeah, that would be true.
Yeah. Okay. What else? Oh, one of the things I liked what you mentioned in the book, and I used to do, but going to Stanford now, there are no more toll booth operators. You talked about paying it forward.
Yeah. I mean, it's so important to pay it forward, in everything we do. And so that concept is just, it's almost essentially a degree of altruism, right? That when you see someone and willing to help and the energy that you get back from it. And I can relate to that because when I would volunteer for the cooking classes or I volunteer and we go out on the weekends after a long week, and I'll be honest, sometimes I do not feel like getting up and going out and doing that after a long week that's there. But when I do it and I'm engaging with people, talking about their blood pressure and nutrition, or I'm at an event and I'm speaking, I get recharged. I get reinvigorated. It gives back more to me than I give to other individuals based on those moments. And so when I pay it forward, paying it forward means giving someone, giving of yourself and lending in to help someone else out. And that's what's so important. And it doesn't have to be that you have to give a lecture, that you have to do it. It's in your own space, your own realm, your own expertise. All of us have something to give, even if it's a word of encouragement, even if it's a smile, even if it's a hold the door open. These simple, small acts of kindness can be a method in which we pay it forward for a life well lived.
What I wanted to ask you, and this is unrelated to this topic, perhaps, but were you familiar with that big thing Forks Over Knives did, the great oil debate?
Yes.
Plant-based doctors, I don't know if they're cardiologists, are recommending oil. And one of the viewers is saying, how protective is whole food plant-based no oil against heart disease and cancer?
Yeah, so I mean, the only study that I'm actually aware of is one that was done, published by my colleague Monica Agarwal, and published, I believe it was in Circulation towards the end of 2024. And she was the one that did a crossover study, if I recall correctly, in terms of looking at individuals who are on essentially a whole food plant-based diet and those who are on the essentially no oil or oil diet. And what she essentially saw was that both had a reduction in their cardiometabolic markers, but those who had the no oil seemed to they had an improvement in their cardiometabolic profile. What that means to me is what we've been getting to at towards the latter half of our conversation. There may not be a one size that fits all. That what we're seeing is that you have to inspect what you expect. So to the caller who wrote in about her bypass surgery and the multiple stents, your situation may be different than someone else's. And so you may recognize that, hey, you know what, if I've been a little bit liberal on my oil and on some of the other plant-based fats that are there in my diet, but we're seeing once again that my levels aren't quite where they need to be. For you, you might be that individual who needs to move towards no oil, right? So same thing. I remember speaking with Ocean Robbins, and he gave the same scenario as it relates to his own cardiac biomarkers. And I can say that because he said it in public, not private to me. But noticing that, hey, these numbers are a little bit high. So he went extremely strict and eliminated any plant oils or sterols or anything of that sort at all. And his numbers plummeted down. And so he recognized the power. So what that means is the key denominator is you have to know, inspect what you expect. You're looking at the numbers to see where are the results of my actions to see if this is acceptable to me. And is this risk acceptable? Knowing that these numbers or markers, inflammatory markers, are associated with a level of risk for future events, is this risk acceptable for me to continue in this dietary practice, or do I want to lower that risk as much as possible? And that's only a decision that you can make.
Yeah, thank you. We always get this question whenever we have any cardiologist on, and I don't know if you have a succinct answer, but everybody wants to know, what do you do about AFib? It seems like I know a lot of people with it.
Yeah. Aphib, Aphib, number one, first and foremost, is we have to prevent you from having a stroke. And that oftentimes means one of two things: either a blood thinner, or we put a device in that will go ahead and prevent the clot from leaving out and causing a stroke. There is no documented method of reducing your risk of stroke through lifestyle. There is documented evidence of decreasing the recurrence, decreasing the prevalence, not to zero, but in a good number of individuals through aggressive lifestyle, nutrition, weight loss, and so forth. And there is almost a bimodal curve or J point with exercise. Too much exercise increases the risk. Not enough exercise, that increases the risk. But the Goldilocks, just enough, can help you.
How do you, that's an interesting question. So how do you get the Goldilocks with exercise? Because exercise is in your selfish acronym.
Yeah. So, I mean, number one, okay, I'll get some haters out there, but marathon running is probably not the ideal state for you. So, when you do the continuous long-term endurance athlete type of scenarios, there's a relationship between increased likelihood of atrial fibrillation, increased levels of a measurement we give called troponins that we measure in the body, bloodstream, which means degradation of the heart muscle with the more activity that you do. So we have to be cautious on that regards. But we know that moderate exercise, that could be walking, that could be jogging. That means your heart rate inside that range of around 60% of your maximum predicted that you get by taking 220 minus your age and roughly 60% of that, that will give you kind of like about the range that is going to be good, right? So we know that there is value in being active, probably less value. And it makes sense. I mean, if we look at the history, the origins of marathon, that was about someone who ran and then died, right? So it can't be great.
Right. You talked a little bit about meditation in your book. What impact does that have? And do you do it, and how do you do it?
I do it. Yes, I do it. I tend to focus on breathing. And, as I mentioned, I'm kind of faith-based and so forth in my approach. I will stop and I will have it typically in the morning, right? Because my mind may wake up racing and it's like, okay, let me get at it and it's like, no, calm down first. Take a few moments. I will do it sometimes in the middle of the day, only for a couple of minutes. And typically I focus on my breathing more so and just clearing my mind for a moment. So I'll do box breathing is what I typically will do. And that's breathing in for a particular number, typically four, hold it for four, breathe out for four, hold it for four, and continue that cycle. And that's similar to what Navy SEALs will do to kind of lower my stress and give me back focus in those moments. But I believe that there is power as it relates to meditation, as we've mentioned already, on so many different fronts. And so, yes, the stress, but then also when we look just in general in terms of our mindset and that focus, because so many of us were distracted. I mean, right now, if you could really see everything I have two phones, I have a monitor. I have two computers that are here where I read studies, I do different things. I'm just attached. And so sometimes you have to just calm down and step back and take a deep breath. And we all need to do that. And it's so powerful in terms of just adopting, incorporating that into your lifestyle. Just a moment. It doesn't take like a half hour and closing your eyes and doing all of this stuff, a minute or two, just to give yourself back peace.
Yeah, thank you. What is your exercise regime like? I'm pretty sure I know your dietary regime, but what do you do for exercise? How often and what?
So my goal is 7 days a week, and then I feel badly when I don't hit 7 days a week. So, but I typically am somewhere around 4 to 5 days a week consistently. And so I typically will do a form of cardio, and I'll do a form of HIIT, high intensity interval training, that gives me the biggest bang for my buck is what I'll do. So when I do the hit in that moment, that will spike my heart rate up and kind of lower it down. I will also do resistance training because that's extremely important. And then I tend to follow that up with some form of stretching yoga. The stretching yoga I need to be more consistent with. That's probably the least favorite of my favorite in terms of the way my body feels I feel the best with that. But I can't mentally do it on a consistent basis because I feel like I need to do something a little bit more manly and aggressive, out there.
Nice. Let me just see if there's any more questions in the chat. Yeah, people are saying how much exercise. Yeah. I didn't realize you could actually do too much exercise. Is that just for people with AFib or is that everybody?
Well, primarily with individuals with atrial fibrillation is what we see it in terms of the adverse effects. I think one of the key things we just have to listen to our body, right? That becomes extremely important in terms of our body allowing time to recover, and that's where sleep comes in. So when we look at the components of exercise, allowing that time for healing becomes important. So not just the nutrition, but also in terms of just the rest becomes important in that sleep. And what's so interesting talking about exercise is that there's evidence that supports really laughing yoga in terms of endothelial function, of when you smile and being able to go a little bit further in terms of when you're pushing yourself. So my recommendations, most of the patients I'm dealing with, they're not exercising at all. So I've met very few where I'm trying to pull them back from exercising. I've only had probably about a handful in my entire career where I'm trying to restrain them from exercising.
It's not usually the people aren't, it's not a problem getting them to eat less kale or exercise less. It's
Exactly.
usually, well, I love that you included humor because for me, if anything's going to save my life, it's going to be the H because I pretty much had the diet and the exercise dialed in. Of course, I can work on stress. And that's the thing about cancer treatment. Like, I understand that a Stanford oncologist is not going to put a red nose on and walk around like Patch Adams, although it may not be a bad idea. But there's not a lot of comedy in cancer. I'll just tell you, it's like pretty dour and pretty dire. And I mean, I'm the funny one at all my appointments and my infusions, because I feel like if you don't laugh, you'll cry. And I think bringing levity even to, serious situations like this, there's just something about the release of laughter that to me is, that's what I live for. I love comedy, whether I'm watching it or performing it. Dogs and comedy are just it, baby.
I love it. I love it. But I mean, the thing is, a person doesn't have to be funny themselves, right? So when I'm sitting there, I'm having a stressful day, and I say this all the time, I will literally will put on some comedian. I'll put on whatever little clip someone has sent me just to kind of refresh and make me laugh. I'll put on a comedy show that I know I like while I'm doing something serious to get a little bit of levity, to allow myself and lower that stress hormone and to change the whole dynamic. And to be honest, that's been life saving for me. It really truly has. I mean, I gave you the example of the individuals who had blockages in the arteries of their heart and they went through forgiveness training. There also was another group. And then what they did for cardiac rehab, which is a lifestyle driven type of program to implement in terms of nutrition and medications and exercise, et cetera, shown to be extremely life saving. And we understand that. One group, they had them watch 30 minutes of whatever comedy show they wanted. The other group, keep doing what you're doing. And the group that watched the comedy, that laughed, they had less admissions to the hospital, less chest pain, improved outcomes. And that's what it's about, especially in this era where there's so much to cry about. There's so
Absolutely.
much to be angry about. And so having those moments are so powerful.
Yeah, I don't watch news. I don't watch really very rare for me to watch a drama. I completely agree with you. Lisa, hi Lisa. Lisa's a wonderful hypnotherapist.
Hey,
And she asks if you have ever heard of Dr. Herbert Benson, the cardiologist from Harvard, who wrote the 1975 bestseller, The Relaxation Response.
I have not. I will have to check that out.
That Lisa sent me a book called Spontaneous Healing, which I just finished by Dr. Andrew Weil. And it's like the one sentence in the book that stood out the most to me was that treatment comes from the outside, healing comes from the inside.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's what I say to colleagues all the time is that patients get better in spite of us, not because of us many times. That's not always the case, but many times that is the case.
Yeah. And people are pointing out that the four wonderful vegan icons that passed away literally helped millions of people during their lifetime. Thank you for pointing that out. So I hope you understand this question. Uh, have any of the people who have passed away and what might have happened taught you things that may need to be reviewed or questioned for everyone to keep learning?
I'll be honest, the only thing that has come to my awareness is taking time to be selfish. If I'm completely transparent with you, and this is not to be self-promoting, but I think the one thing I've heard in some instances is just the passion, and I can really this resonates with me, of trying to deliver information out to the masses, of trying to make sure that the issues as they arise, the research of trying to figure out how to speak to individuals in a way in which they will receive the information that can change their lives. That takes a lot of time and effort on top of taking care of patients, which can wear and tear you. So I'm a dovetail for a second. I hope that that's
Yeah,
okay.
absolutely.
The young generation, they have a saying out there, right? They have a saying that when they have sexual relationships with individuals, they call it collecting bodies, and which didn't really quite resonate with me when I first heard it. And I understood that these people never leave them. They impact their future relationships. Well, for physicians who take care of patients and the patient who has a bad outcome, who dies under your care, you're collecting bodies that never leave you. That's a level of stress that no one can understand. When I'm making decisions that can impact a person, their life or death in that moment, that sometimes are direct cause and effect, sometimes that you have no control over, it leaves a load on your shoulders that's hard to take off. And so what I recognize in providers out there who've passed away is that many of them had very similar type of experiences. Many of them worked into wee hours of the morning trying to create content to help others, neglecting perhaps themselves, neglecting perhaps relationships, but still eating healthfully, but not doing the other components. And so that's what it's taught me for the most part, more than anything else, if I'm honest.
Yeah. And so you, yeah, absolutely, because we don't know how well they slept or how much they slept. There's so many things that we can't even speculate. You know, there's a question, and we get this a lot about checking omega-3 fatty acids levels. And Vi would like to know, do you recommend checking them? Her cardiologist told her not to take an omega-3 supplement because she's on Eliquis for AFib.
Yeah, so I think that in our functional medicine cohort, that they probably will check that a little bit more and make adjustments to kind of see what you need on a personalized level and what the impact is of your dietary intake. In terms of now, you do have to be very conscious of taking supplements. So supplements are not cure all. So I think your cardiologist is actually correct. We don't want your blood too thinned in terms of it. And so, but from a dietary component, that is something that we don't have any proof of that from eating our megas in terms of the adverse effect there. And that's where I would go down that road primarily. Now, if you said, you know what, I can't eat any less of it, so I need to, I can't eat more than what I'm already eating. And so I want to check and see how is this working with me. Then I think you can get that done. Most standard healthcare systems probably will not check it. To be, if I'm completely honest with you, they will not check it.
Yeah, yeah. There was a funny comment posted by a viewer. I'm trying to find it. That the entire medical, here it is from Cardate. The entire medical system has no humor except for the bill. That's more like tears than humor, but that great comment. I bought
Absolutely.
Norman Cousins' book the minute I was diagnosed, and I read
Yeah.
Anatomy of an Illness because I heard he just laughed himself well. You know, he liked Marx Brothers and Three Stooges. I might choose other forms of comedy, but I agree that, I think even stuff happens with like immunity cells that when you laugh, they
Yes.
get released that can help you fight any disease, you know?
That's right. No, it's absolutely true. And so, I mean, every little bit adds. And so you have to think of it once again, just like a recipe that you're creating inside the kitchen. That little bit of spice, it kind of really sets that recipe off, or the little bit of flavor of this. And so, all these little things, they may seem like little, they may seem like things that don't count, but they count an awful lot for the entire meal. And so, I think it's important for us to really embrace all of them.
Yeah. Well, I think, it's really cool how some medical schools are teaching culinary medicine, teaching the doctors to cook. Maybe they need a stand-up comedy or an improvisational comedy module in medical school, you know?
I think so. I think so. Well, yeah, definitely in med school. I mean, we see the amount of stress in medical school and burnout and so forth that exists. There definitely has to be a different mindset there, looking back.
Yeah. What do you think of that guy? I think his name's Brian Johnson, the one that's trying to live forever, and he has a very precise diet and supplement regime. Are you familiar at all with him? He's got a massive following.
Yeah, just peripherally, not in any detail. I mean, I think everyone wants to live well, and as long as he's finding joy in life on this journey, it's about the journey. It's about the journey,
Absolutely.
right? And so if his journey to live exceptionally well is more stressful, as we've already spoken about, then that's contradictory.
Absolutely. Andrina says, as a doctor, do you prescribe medication regularly? Are you able to advise instead on diet?
So both. So as I mentioned, I don't believe that medication prescriptions are a scarlet letter. My first goal is to have individuals see where they're at and what they want. What's their goal? The goal is to get better. What are they willing to do to get what they want? And if they're willing to do the work, and willing not to do certain things, I'm willing to support them. Now, oftentimes what I will tell them is, I have no idea of checking whether or not you're taking it. You're doing what you're supposed to. And you say, well, you can't tell if I'm taking the medication either. Well, I can tell if you're getting refills because I doubt you're going to get refills and let them just sit on your countertop. And so what I will tell them is that let's adjust. We start off with the medications as you increase the lifestyle and we need less of the medication. I'm happy to back it off, but we need to make sure we lower your risk right now. The goal is to lower your risk. And I give constantly this analogy. If you're like, you know what? I set the alarm on my home, I lock all the doors, but you choose to leave the windows open and the door unlocked and set the alarm, you're not really doing anything. You haven't lowered the risk completely. So the goal is lower that risk first, and then you try and assess the situation of what you can do additionally at that point.
Absolutely. I want to respect your time, so just tell me like when it's time for the last question. But a few people are going on the vegan cruise, which unfortunately is the weekend of my conference. Otherwise, you'd be speaking at it, and I'd be going to the cruise. Are you going to be there? What other presentations or conferences might you be at? How can people connect with you, follow you? I have some things below in the show notes, but mainly the link to buy the book. Come on, it's good. I didn't read it.
Yes.
Listen to it.
I love it. I love it. Thank you. And so going back to the very beginning, as I kind of dive into that, is that AJ, you've always been the biggest, the best supporter of me since day one. Before I even knew I wanted to do anything along this line outside of just living healthier for myself, you supported and pushed me down this road. And so I'm forever grateful for you. And so right now there's several things that are coming up. I'm doing some local things at medical school. I'm doing something in Northern California with the Permanent Day Medical Group coming up in August. I will then do the Holistic Holiday at Sea coming up after that. And then a bit later on, I'll be in Kauai in July, but that's for primary care. Going to give them a little infusion of lifestyle and nutrition there. And then I'll do something in Napa again. And then there's with the Help Conference, which is a conference where we're looking at the intersection between community, trying to rebuild the communities across the United States, chronic, the power of lifestyle of nutrition. And so bringing together an aggregate of speakers, the Kim Williams out there, the Milton Mills out there, the Dexter Sherney's out there. And so I'm looking forward to that. That's going to be in Florida this upcoming October 10th through 12th is when that will be. And then you can always find me on YouTube now. Right. So check it out on YouTube. Healthy Heart Doc. Just search for Columbus Batiste on there, but Healthy Heart Doc, where I'm trying to put content out there. I much prefer this just discussion, but right now I'm doing a little bit more of just kind of diving into topics and kind of going through and giving my thoughts on different areas that hopefully you'll find enriching and change your life a bit.
Well, I'm just so sorry you have to go to Maui, you poor thing.
Yeah, I know. I was upset about that, and my wife was like, "Fine, I will go with you if you're forcing me."
Yeah. No, I mean, I'll say I don't want to travel anymore. And then somebody says, you want to speak in Hawaii? Okay, I'm on the next plane. There's just certain places that are irresistible. So, are you doing any more work with Dr. Eric Walsh? I loved when you two were together on your channel. He's one of my favorites, and we never hear from him.
He's incredible. He is speaking around the world literally. And so we just have not had a chance. We spoke. Our schedules didn't align. He came out and we were going to do something together, and then I had to travel so we could make it. But we're still trying. He's a good friend. I just spoke to him about a month or so ago.
Yeah, well, I hope he'll come back. One of the things I appreciated about your book, because you actually talked about it, and this is something he often talks about, is food addiction. Because I think I'm not going to mention any names because I love anyone who's teaching plant-based health and nutrition on any level. But there are many plant-based doctors that don't even think stress matters.
Yeah.
That it's not a big deal, that, the diet is king and everything else is just, whatever. And there's some that just still don't believe in food addiction. And Dr. Walsh does for sure, and you do. And you even talked about it a bit in your book, which everyone needs to get right now, this minute. Click the link, get the Audible if you want. It's a really nice, easy listen. So thank you for acknowledging that.
Yeah, no, it's important. And so whether or not we call whatever synonym we want to use for this, there is clear and distinct intentionality in terms of the way the food is produced and it's packaged and it's marketed inside of society and it's targeted. And that's beyond a shadow of a doubt. Because why is it that we will crave a small word gets up there and you crave that? It just gets inside of you. But we don't, well, I do kind of crave my greens, but a lot
Now,
of people
now
don't.
you do,
Yeah,
right?
now I do, but a lot of people don't crave the things that are basic. And I always will tell patients, I said, if you have to use words like moderate, I'm moderate with this, I'm temperate with this, it probably isn't something you need to be eating because you never say, I'm gonna be moderate with my kale, I'm gonna be moderate with my beans, I'm gonna be moderate with X, Y, and Z. It's only the things that probably raise a level of caution. And so that will be something that depends upon your disease state and what you want, what your goals are for life.
Yeah. I'm sure you're familiar with the blue zones, and I do love Dan Buettner. But the thing about the blue zones is like there's a difference between observational studies and other kinds of studies that are done in medicine, right? And for example, 4 out of the 5 blue zones attributed alcohol is one of the things that contributed, but yet Loma Linda, they don't drink alcohol and they live just as long as longer. And so I think people pick what they like and go with that.
Of course, of course. That's
Yeah.
that's our nature. We're gonna ask opinions until we find someone who's going to match what we want to hear. And so I always argue, not argue, but I ask questions of, is the alcohol because of the camaraderie? Is it because of the socialization in that moment? Is it because of the intimacy that in that moment that they're having it? And they're saying, oh, we have a little wine with dinner, but I'm having a communal dinner with other individuals. And so now I'm engaging in a different way. Is that really the power there? Because we know the resveratrol comes from grapes and from nuts and so forth. It's a separate entity that we see. So yeah, it's interesting stuff. It's interesting stuff.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for there were things that I purposely avoided on these questions. I didn't want to get into vaccine land and
Yeah,
COVID land. Not that they're not important, but that really wasn't germane to the topic at hand, I believe. But thank you for explaining it so well. And, we want to, if we can add a C to selfish for compassion for self and others. I don't know where you're going to put the shellfish. I don't know. SCH, because, people just need to, realize that you don't always know what's going on with a person, I mean, and cut them some slack and have some grace. And you
Absolutely.
don't know what somebody else is going through. And you don't always have the whole story. So
That's
don't
right.
speculate. They say don't assume, because when you assume, you make an ass out of you and me.
That's right. That's right. That's right. And I would argue and say that the compassion falls under the umbrellaship of love.
Yeah, okay,
Truly,
Al, that's
truly,
perfect.
truly loving and as an action, we're being compassionate and empathizing with others and their experience and not knowing. And that's what it should be about. And we have to move from this culture in which we're so quick to vilify people and to really turn them into evil individuals or saying this, that, or the other, but really trying to just support them with a level of compassion. And that goes on both sides, right?
Absolutely. Well,
That
and
goes
that's
on both
why,
sides.
that I'm not going to dignify the names of their channel, but there's YouTube channels that are devoted just to being anti-vegan. And when a vegan that has a presence dies, they just have a field day with it. See, the plant-based diet didn't work. Well,
Yeah. Yeah. That's
yeah,
unfortunate. That's unfortunate.
yeah. The one thing a plant-based diet can't fix is being an asshole.
No.
I'm sorry that I had to say that, but it's like, there's a lot of judgy vegans out there.
There are. There are
Absolutely.
people in general. And so we need to
Yeah.
kind of have a gut check across the board.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thanks so much. Oh my gosh, it's been far
Yes.
too long since you've been on the show. Come back anytime with Eric,
Love
without
it.
Eric. It doesn't matter. And I hope to see you in person. Thanks so much, Dr.
All
Batiste.
right. Take care.
Oh, take care of yourself. And thanks so much for watching another episode of Chef AJ and Friends. Please get the book, click the link below, and come back on Friday for Dr. Juan.